The only person at this table who understands less about money than my dog is the maid. Laughter burst across the dining room like breaking glass. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm gold light across polished silverware, expensive wine glasses, and the frozen face of Maya Johnson. She stood beside the 12-foot mahogany table, one hand resting on a serving tray, her eyes lowered. Billionaire Richard Whitmore leaned back in his chair, enjoying every second of it. Around him sat investors, family members, attorneys, and political donors. Every seat was occupied. Every smile was aimed at her. "Come on, Maya," Richard continued, swirling red wine in his glass. "At least laugh with us." More laughter followed. Maya forced a small smile. The room smelled of roasted steak, cigar smoke, and old money. She had worked inside the Whitmore estate for almost 2 years. Long enough to know that speaking back never ended well. Long enough to understand that people like Richard did not see her as a person. They saw a uniform. A pair of hands. A shadow moving through rooms they owned. But tonight felt different. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Across the table sat Daniel Whitmore, Richard's oldest son. 36 years old. Expensive suit. Perfect smile. Perfect posture. Yet sweat glistened along his temple despite the cool air flowing from hidden ceiling vents. Maya noticed it immediately. Daniel kept checking his phone under the table. Every few minutes his jaw tightened. Every few minutes he glanced toward a black leather briefcase resting beside his chair. Then his eyes darted away. Like he was guarding something. "Maya!" Richard snapped his fingers. "The wine." She stepped forward. The silver tray felt heavier than usual. Crystal glasses clinked softly as she poured. Nobody thanked her. Nobody looked at her. Except Daniel. For one strange second, their eyes met. His expression changed instantly. Not arrogance. Not annoyance. Fear. Real fear. Maya felt a chill slide down her spine. Then it vanished. Daniel looked away so quickly she almost thought she imagined it. The conversation shifted to business. A merger. Hundreds of millions of dollars. New contracts. New investors. Maya continued serving quietly while fragments of discussion drifted through the room. Most of it meant nothing to her. Until one sentence caught her attention. "The offshore transfers are already hidden," Daniel said. Silence followed. A strange silence. Brief. Sharp. Then Richard laughed and raised his glass. "You mean tax strategies?" Several guests chuckled nervously. Daniel forced a smile. But Maya saw it again. The fear. Bigger this time. The room suddenly felt hotter. Somewhere deep in the house, a grandfather clock chimed 9 times. Maya turned toward the kitchen. As she moved away from the table, something slipped from Daniel's briefcase. A single folded document. Nobody noticed. Not Richard. Not the guests. Not even Daniel. The paper landed silently beside her shoe. Maya stopped. Her pulse quickened. The laughter behind her sounded distant now. Muffled. Like water filling her ears. Slowly, she bent down and picked it up. At the top of the page was a company name she had never seen before. Beneath it were account numbers. Transfer records. Amounts so large they barely looked real. Then she saw the signature at the bottom. Daniel Whitmore. Her eyes widened. And just before she could read the next line, a voice exploded behind her. "What exactly are you looking at?" Maya turned around. Daniel was already standing. His face had gone completely pale. "Sir, that is not what he said." The words hung over the dining room like a crack in glass. Nobody moved. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows while chandelier light shimmered across silver trays and crystal glasses. William Harrington slowly lowered his pen. The billionaire's smile faded. Around the table, investors exchanged uneasy glances. Olivia could feel every eye on her. The maid. The outsider. The woman who had just interrupted a $1 billion deal. "Then what did he say?" William asked. His voice was calm, but the pressure beneath it felt crushing. Olivia swallowed. Across the table, the French investor suddenly shifted in his chair. It was subtle, almost invisible. But she noticed it. Fear. Real fear. He said the contract changes everything after the signature. A nervous laugh escaped one of the guests. That could mean anything. The tension broke for half a second before William looked directly at Olivia. Did you misunderstand? More eyes turned toward her. More doubt. More judgment. Olivia felt heat rising into her face. The humiliation returned instantly. She knew that feeling. People assuming she did not belong in the room. People deciding she was wrong before she even spoke. The investor leaned forward. This is becoming ridiculous. His English was suddenly perfect. Several attorneys looked at him. Olivia noticed that too. Earlier, he had relied heavily on translators. Now he seemed eager to speak for himself. William tapped the contract. Olivia, unless you have proof, this dinner is over. The room relaxed slightly. People wanted the interruption to end. They wanted the maid to return to the background where she belonged. Olivia almost stepped back. Almost apologized. Then she remembered the exact sentence. Every word. Every pause. Every tone. Her pulse accelerated. He did not say the company would become more profitable. Silence returned. He said you would lose control. The room froze. William's jaw tightened. Across the table, the investor's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Several guests stared at him instead of Olivia for the first time all evening. A phone camera quietly lifted from beneath the table. Someone was recording now. The atmosphere changed. Olivia could feel it. William stood up slowly. His chair scraped against the marble floor. The sound cut through the room. Explain. Olivia looked toward the contract. The sentence was not about growth. Her voice remained steady. It was about ownership. The investor suddenly laughed. Too quickly. Too loudly. Nobody joined him. Rain crashed against the windows. Thunder rolled over the city skyline. One attorney reached for the contract. Another adjusted his glasses and began turning pages. William watched them carefully. Seconds felt like minutes. The room seemed unable to breathe. Then the attorney stopped turning pages. His expression changed instantly. Sir? William looked over. What? The attorney swallowed. There is a secondary voting provision. The room erupted into whispers. Investors leaned forward. Phones appeared. The investor rose from his chair. That clause is standard. But his voice no longer carried confidence. Olivia saw sweat gathering near his collar. William grabbed the contract and scanned the page himself. The color slowly drained from his face. The power in the room shifted so suddenly it felt physical. For the first time all night, nobody was looking at the billionaire. They were looking at Olivia. The maid he had mocked 20 minutes earlier. Sophia Harrington watched her with open disbelief. How did you know? Olivia hesitated. She could feel the weight of the question. She looked toward the French investor. Then toward the contract. Then back to William. Because that was not the first time I heard people use that phrase. The investor's face went pale. Complete silence swallowed the room. William stared at her. What phrase? Olivia opened her mouth to answer. Then she noticed something sticking out of the investor's partially open briefcase. A document marked with a symbol she had not seen in years. The same symbol connected to an international fraud case she thought had disappeared forever. Her heartbeat stopped. Because she suddenly recognized exactly who he was. Daniel's face went pale. Give me that. His voice cracked harder than he intended. Every conversation at the table died instantly. The soft music from hidden ceiling speakers suddenly felt too loud. Maya held the document without moving. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers, not from fear, but from the air conditioning pouring through the room. Richard's smile faded. What is going on? he asked. Daniel stepped forward too quickly. Nothing. It is a draft. But Maya had already seen enough. Transfer amounts. Hidden entities. Signatures repeated across multiple pages. The kind of numbers ordinary employees never accidentally find. Around the table, guests exchanged nervous glances. Crystal glasses reflected tiny flashes of chandelier light across anxious faces. Maya slowly handed the document back. She expected relief. Instead, Daniel looked terrified. That terrified her even more. Sir, Maya said quietly to Richard, I think you should review that file. The room froze. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman lowered her wine glass halfway to the table. Richard stared at Maya as if she had forgotten her place. Then he laughed. Cold. Sharp. Since when does household staff audit financial records? Scattered laughter followed, weaker this time. Maya felt every eye in the room settle on her. The humiliation returned, heavier than before. Yet something had changed. People were no longer laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they were nervous. Daniel immediately seized the moment. Exactly. She has no idea what she is looking at. His smile returned, but only partly. Sweat still glistened along his neck. Maya noticed his hand. It would not stop shaking. Then a phone vibrated. A short buzz. Everyone looked toward Daniel. His screen lit up on the table before he could hide it. One message. 3 words. Account flagged internally. Daniel snatched the phone so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. Silence swallowed the room. Richard's expression hardened. Daniel? It is nothing. Too fast. Too defensive. Maya felt her stomach tighten. She had heard that tone before. Years ago. Before she left her old career. Before life forced her into jobs nobody respected. It was the sound people made when the truth was catching up. Richard stood slowly. The room seemed smaller now. Show me the phone. Daniel did not move. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain began tapping softly against the glass. Inside, nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Then came another vibration. Another message. This time the screen remained visible long enough for several guests to see it. Emergency review request. One investor pushed back from the table. Another quietly reached for his briefcase. Richard's eyes narrowed. What review? Daniel swallowed. For the first time in his life, he looked less like an heir and more like a trapped man. Maya expected anger. Excuses? A denial. Instead, Daniel looked directly at her. You went through my files. The accusation echoed through the room. Every head turned toward Maya. Richard's face darkened immediately. The pressure shifted. Just like that. Maya became the target again. Did you? Richard asked. His voice was dangerously calm. Maya opened her mouth. Then stopped. Because she had just noticed something else. Something hidden in the corner of the page Daniel was trying so desperately to protect. A second signature. Not Daniel's. Not an accountant's. Not a lawyer's. Her pulse stumbled. Slowly, she looked up from the document to Richard Whitmore. And for the first time that night, she realized the signature belonged to someone sitting at the table right now. The realization hit Maya so hard she nearly dropped the page. The second signature did not belong to Daniel. It belonged to Evelyn Whitmore, Richard's wife. For a moment, the entire room seemed to tilt. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the dining table, scattering cold reflections across silver knives and untouched wine glasses. Rain tapped harder against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, the estate's backup generator hummed through the storm. Maya slowly lifted her eyes. Evelyn sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. Too still. Her fingers remained wrapped around her glass, but the color had drained from her face. Richard followed Maya's gaze. Then he saw it. The room immediately changed. The tension was no longer about a maid who had spoken out of turn. It was about family. Evelyn? Richard's voice was low. Dangerous. Nobody moved. Several guests quietly reached for their phones beneath the table. Tiny camera lights flickered on and off. The whispers started instantly. Soft. Nervous. Growing louder by the second. Daniel stepped forward. Dad, this is not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is. Richard's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Maya had never seen him lose control before. Not once in 2 years. But now the billionaire who controlled boardrooms, politicians, and billion-dollar deals looked like a man watching his house catch fire from the inside. Evelyn finally stood. Richard! Her voice trembled. That alone shocked everyone. Evelyn Whitmore never trembled. Never. Do not! Richard raised a hand. Do not lie to me! Silence crashed into the room. The air felt heavy. Suffocating. Maya could hear the soft vibration of phones recording under the table. She could hear someone breathing too fast near the back wall. Daniel suddenly pointed toward her. She caused this. Heads turned immediately. The pressure snapped back onto Maya. She has been snooping through private records. She is manipulating what she found. A few guests nodded. Others looked uncertain. Maya felt dozens of eyes studying her. Judging her. Looking for a reason not to believe her. It would have been easier for everyone if she were wrong. Richard stared at her. Did you search through my family's files? The question hung in the air. Maya swallowed. Every instinct told her to stay quiet. To disappear. To become invisible again. But then she noticed something nobody else had. The page Danielle was desperately trying to hide was not the first page of the transaction record. It was page 7. Which meant 6 pages were missing. Her pulse quickened. This document is incomplete, Maya said. The room froze again. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Just for a second. But she saw it. Panic. Pure panic. What? Richard asked. Maya stepped closer to the table. The numbering at the bottom. She pointed carefully. This starts on page 7. Several guests leaned forward. One attorney grabbed the document. His eyes moved across the footer. Then his face tightened. She is right. The room erupted into whispers. Daniel's chair scraped violently across the hardwood floor. That proves nothing. But nobody was listening anymore. Not because Maya was powerful. Not because she was wealthy. Because she was right. And everyone knew it. Richard turned toward his son. Slowly. Deliberately. Where are the other 6 pages? Daniel did not answer. The silence became unbearable. Then another vibration echoed across the room. This time it was not Daniel's phone. It was Evelyn's. Every eye dropped toward the screen lighting up beside her hand. She stared at it. Frozen. Richard grabbed the phone before she could stop him. He looked down. His face went completely blank. Not angry. Not confused. Blank. The kind of expression people make when reality suddenly stops making sense. Evelyn closed her eyes. Daniel took one step backward. Maya felt cold run through her entire body. Richard slowly lowered the phone. Then he looked directly at Maya. How did you know to look at page 7? Before Maya could answer, the front doors of the mansion burst open downstairs, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the house. The footsteps thundered closer. Fast. Urgent. The sound echoed through the marble hallways beneath the dining room like a warning nobody wanted to hear. Every conversation stopped. Every phone camera lifted higher. Even the rain seemed quieter. Richard Whitmore stood frozen beside the table, still holding Evelyn's phone. His knuckles had turned white around the device. Then the dining room doors swung open. A man in a soaked gray suit rushed inside, breathing hard. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the polished hardwood floor. Several investors recognized him immediately. The room erupted into whispers. It was Michael Graves, Whitmore Holdings' chief compliance officer. He never attended family dinners. Never. Richard. His voice shook. We have a serious problem. The silence became suffocating. Maya watched Richard's jaw tighten. The billionaire looked less like a titan now and more like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Not now. It cannot wait. Graves swallowed hard. Federal auditors just contacted headquarters. The room exploded into murmurs. Several guests lowered their glasses. One investor quietly stepped away from the table. Another immediately started typing on his phone. Daniel's face lost what little color remained. Maya saw it happen in real time. His confidence was collapsing. Piece by piece. Richard took one step toward Graves. Who contacted them? Nobody answered. The only sound came from the storm outside and the soft hum of the ventilation system overhead. Then Maya noticed something. Graves was staring directly at her. Not at Richard. Not at Daniel. Her. Was it you? Daniel suddenly snapped. Every head turned toward Maya. The pressure hit her like a wall. You reported us. His voice grew louder. Desperate. You have been setting this up all night. Several guests immediately nodded. It made sense. Easier to blame the outsider. Easier to blame the employee than the family. Maya felt dozens of eyes locking onto her. Judging her. Accusing her. The humiliation burned hotter than before. Richard looked at her as well. Not with certainty. With doubt. That hurt more. Answer him. Maya's hands tightened at her sides. I did not contact anyone. Daniel laughed bitterly. Convenient. Another vibration shattered the silence. This time it came from Richard's phone. Then another. Then another. A cascade of alerts lit the room blue. Phones began vibrating everywhere. Investors. Attorneys. Advisors. One after another. The room filled with electronic chimes. The sound was relentless. Terrifying. People started reading. Faces changed instantly. One investor stood so quickly his chair crashed backward. Another whispered, "Oh my God!" Maya felt her stomach drop. Richard looked down at his screen. His eyes widened. Then narrowed. Then widened again. The article had already gone public. Anonymous documents. Offshore transfers. Shell companies. Missing funds. The story was spreading across financial news feeds in real time. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Years of reputation were unraveling in seconds. Daniel backed away from the table. This is impossible. His voice barely worked now. Nobody had access. Maya's heartbeat accelerated. Because that was not true. Somebody had access. Somebody still did. Then she noticed Evelyn. While everyone stared at their screens, Evelyn was not reading hers. She was staring at Daniel. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Real tears. Not fear. Regret. The realization hit Maya instantly. Evelyn was not protecting herself. She had been protecting someone else. Richard saw it too. Slowly, he turned toward his wife. What did you do? The question barely escaped his lips. Evelyn closed her eyes. The room held its breath. Daniel stepped forward. Mom. One word. That was all it took. The entire room changed. Richard's face emptied of color. Investors exchanged stunned looks. Maya felt the truth moving beneath the surface now, enormous and terrifying. Bigger than missing money. Bigger than fraud. Bigger than Daniel. Then Evelyn opened her eyes and looked directly at Richard. The money was never the secret. The room went completely silent. Even Daniel stopped breathing. And before anyone could ask what she meant, the lights throughout the mansion flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. Darkness swallowed the room. For one endless second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The storm outside pressed against the mansion windows, and the only sound came from dozens of phones vibrating somewhere in the dark. Then the emergency lights flickered on. Cold white light washed across the dining room, stripping away the warmth of the chandeliers and exposing every nervous face. The room looked different now. Smaller. Harder. More honest. Maya stood motionless near the table. The pale emergency lights reflected off the silver serving tray beside her, casting thin lines of light across the polished floor. Around her, investors stared at screens glowing in their hands. Nobody was eating anymore. Nobody cared about dinner. Richard Whitmore slowly lowered himself into his chair. The movement seemed to age him 10 years. His expensive suit suddenly looked too large. His shoulders no longer filled the room. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. "What did you mean?" he asked quietly. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She stared at the dark window beside her. Rainwater slid down the glass in long silver streaks. Daniel shifted nervously. "Mom!" His voice was barely audible. Evelyn closed her eyes. The silence stretched so long that several people glanced toward Maya instead. She noticed it immediately. The looks had changed. Hours ago they saw a servant. Then a problem. Then an accusation. Now they were watching her the way people watch the only person who might know where the fire started. Maya felt the weight of it settling onto her shoulders. Yet strangely, she felt calmer than anyone else in the room. Because pieces were finally beginning to fit together. One investor quietly cleared his throat. Another lowered his phone. Even the constant alerts had slowed. The chaos was fading. Something heavier was taking its place. Anticipation. Richard rubbed his forehead slowly. "Evelyn!" His voice cracked. "Tell me what is happening." She finally looked at him. The expression on her face stopped several people from breathing. It was not guilt. It was grief. Deep. Old grief. The kind that had been carried for years. Maya noticed Daniel look away immediately. He could not meet his mother's eyes. That was when she understood something. Whatever secret Evelyn was protecting had started long before the missing money. Long before tonight. Long before page 7. A soft vibration interrupted the silence. Maya glanced toward the table. Richard's phone had lit up again. The screen reflected against the metal frame of a wine bucket nearby. One new message. No sender name. Richard stared at it without touching it. So did everyone else. The room felt frozen. "Read it," someone whispered. Richard hesitated. Then he opened the message. His eyes scanned the screen once. Then again. Color drained from his face. The phone slipped slightly in his hand. Across the room, Daniel looked terrified. Not nervous. Terrified. Richard slowly raised his eyes toward Maya. It was the first time all evening he had looked at her without arrogance, anger, or doubt. There was only one thing left in his expression now. Fear. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. The question stunned the room. Maya blinked. "Almost 2 years." Richard swallowed hard. The emergency lights hummed softly overhead. Rain tapped against the glass. Nobody understood why he was asking. Nobody except Evelyn. Her eyes closed immediately. As if she already knew where his mind had gone. Richard looked back at the phone. Then at Maya again. "And before that?" Maya felt every face turned toward her. She had avoided talking about her past for years. It was easier that way. Safer. But now the entire room was waiting. Investors. Attorneys. Family members. Even Daniel. Maya drew a slow breath. "I worked in forensic accounting." Complete silence. One attorney lowered his glasses. Another investor straightened in his seat. The room shifted again. Suddenly the strange observations. The missing pages. The signatures. The inconsistencies. All of it made sense. Richard looked like someone who had just realized he ignored the only qualified person in the building. Yet even that realization felt small compared to whatever was hidden inside the message on his phone. Then Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard, the money was only covering up something much worse." Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Somewhere deep inside the mansion, a distant door slowly opened. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. And this time, whoever was coming was heading directly for the dining room. The footsteps stopped outside the dining room. Nobody moved. The emergency lights cast pale reflections across crystal glasses and polished silver, turning every face into a mask of tension. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then the doors opened. A woman in a dark raincoat stepped inside carrying a thick black portfolio. Water dripped from the hem of her coat onto the marble floor. Several attorneys at the table recognized her instantly. Their expressions changed before they said a word. "That is impossible," one investor whispered. Richard rose halfway from his chair. "Karen Ellis?" The woman nodded once. She was the lead forensic investigator Whitmore Holdings had quietly hired 6 months earlier. The same investigator who had vanished after reporting irregularities in the company's books. Every eye followed her as she crossed the room. Her heels clicked softly against the floor. She ignored everyone except Maya. Then she stopped directly in front of her. The room froze. "You were right." The words landed harder than thunder. A ripple moved through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Several people exchanged stunned looks. Daniel's face collapsed. Richard stared in disbelief. Karen slowly opened the portfolio. Inside were documents. Hundreds of pages. Transfer records. Internal communications. Audit trails. Evidence. Years of it. "The missing 6 pages were never missing," Karen said quietly. "They were removed." Nobody spoke. The emergency lights hummed overhead. Maya felt dozens of eyes fixed on her now. Not with suspicion. With shock. Karen pulled out a page and laid it on the table. Then another. Then another. Signatures. Dates. Accounts. Connections. A map of deception stretching back years. Daniel looked ready to bolt from the room. "This proves nothing," he said. But his voice had lost all authority. Karen did not even look at him. "Actually, it proves everything." Richard's breathing became heavier. Maya could hear it from across the table. The billionaire who had controlled every room he entered now looked completely lost. His eyes moved from the documents to his son, then to his wife, then back to Maya. Every answer he needed had been standing in front of him all evening. And he had mocked her. Dismissed her. Humiliated her. Karen turned toward Maya again. "Do you know why I could never finish the investigation?" Maya remained silent. She already suspected the answer. Karen gave a faint nod. "Because every time I got close, someone inside the company altered the trail before I could prove it." She pointed toward the documents. "Tonight you noticed in seconds what an entire team missed for months." The room fell completely silent. One attorney lowered his head. Another investor slowly sat back in his chair. The reversal was happening in real time. Maya could see it in their faces. The woman they treated like furniture had become the only person anyone trusted. Richard finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller than ever before. "Why did nobody tell me?" No one answered. Because everyone already knew the truth. They had told him. He simply listened to the wrong people. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked away. Karen reached into the portfolio one final time. The movement immediately tightened every muscle in the room. She removed a sealed envelope. Thick. Official. Unopened. "There is one more thing." Maya noticed Daniel stop breathing. Richard's face hardened. The envelope was addressed directly to him. Karen placed it on the table. No one touched it. No one even blinked. "The money was never the real objective," she said softly. "It was only a distraction." Richard stared at the envelope as though it might explode. The room seemed to shrink around it. Rain hammered the windows. Phones stopped recording. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. Slowly, Richard reached for the seal. His hand trembled. Then he opened the envelope and unfolded the first page. The color vanished from his face instantly. Maya watched his eyes move across a single paragraph. Then stop. Richard looked up. Straight at Evelyn. Not angry. Not confused. Heartbroken. Evelyn began to cry. And in that terrible silence, Richard whispered 5 words that made the entire room go cold. "You knew about our daughter?" The words hung in the air like a crack running through glass. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The emergency lights cast a pale glow across the room, reflecting in tear-filled eyes and untouched wine glasses. Richard Whitmore stood frozen beside the table, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. Across from him, Evelyn's shoulders collapsed. Years of control vanished in a single moment. Rain tapped softly against the windows now, no longer sounding threatening. Just sad. Daniel stared at the floor. For the first time all night, he looked small. The investors, attorneys, and guests who had spent hours whispering suddenly had nothing left to say. Richard looked at Evelyn as though he no longer recognized her. "You knew?" His voice barely carried across the room. Evelyn nodded slowly. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I found out years ago." The confession landed heavily. Several people lowered their eyes. Others looked away entirely. The room had become something different now. Not a battlefield. A reckoning. Richard's jaw tightened. "And you never told me." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I was trying to protect what was left of this family." Daniel let out a shaky breath. Maya watched him carefully. She could see the guilt written across every movement. Every glance. Every silence. Suddenly the missing money, the altered records, the hidden accounts felt smaller than before. They had never been the heart of the story. They had only been walls built around an older wound. Richard lowered himself into his chair. The billionaire who once filled every room with confidence now looked exhausted. Broken. Human. His eyes drifted across the table and finally landed on Maya. The room noticed immediately. So did she. For several seconds he simply stared. No arrogance. No anger. No dismissal. Only regret. Deep regret. The silence became almost unbearable. Then Richard stood again. Slowly. Deliberately. Every phone camera followed him. Every guest watched. Maya felt dozens of eyes shift toward her. Richard took a few steps forward. The polished floor echoed beneath his shoes. When he stopped, he was standing directly in front of her. The same woman he had mocked hours earlier. The same woman he had laughed at in front of everyone. The same woman who had seen the truth before any executive, attorney, auditor, or investor. Richard swallowed hard. "I was wrong." The room froze. Several guests looked genuinely stunned. Nobody had ever heard those words come from him. Not publicly. Not like this. Maya said nothing. She simply held his gaze. Richard glanced around the room. "Every person here watched me dismiss her." His voice cracked slightly. "Including me." A few people lowered their heads. Others shifted uncomfortably. The humiliation that had once belonged entirely to Maya now hung over the entire table. Richard looked back at her. "You tried to warn us." Maya nodded once. "Yes. And we ignored you." She did not answer. She did not need to. The truth was already sitting in the room with them. Richard exhaled slowly. "Thank you?" The words were simple. Honest. Heavy. Maya noticed the change ripple through the crowd. The investors who had barely looked at her before now watched with respect. The attorneys who doubted her now appeared embarrassed. Even Karen Ellis stood quietly in the corner with a faint look of admiration. Nobody saw a servant anymore. They saw the person who had held her ground when everyone else chose comfort over truth. Yet Maya felt no triumph. No desire to embarrass anyone. Only relief that the truth had finally surfaced. Then Evelyn stepped forward. Her eyes were red. Her voice soft. "You saved more than a company tonight." Maya looked at her. Evelyn tried to continue but could not. Emotion caught in her throat. The room remained silent. Respectfully silent. For the first time all evening, nobody interrupted. Nobody judged. Nobody laughed. Then Maya noticed something. Richard was still holding the letter. The letter that had changed everything. But there were more pages beneath the first one. His thumb covered most of them. Richard noticed her glance. His expression shifted immediately. The sadness returned. The uncertainty. The fear. Slowly, he looked down at the remaining pages. The room felt colder. Karen Ellis saw it too. "There is more, isn't there?" she asked quietly. Richard did not answer. He turned another page. His face drained of color once again. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel took a step backward. And in the terrible silence that followed, Richard whispered a single sentence that made Maya's heart stop. "She is alive." The words settled over the room like falling snow. She is alive. Nobody reacted at first. The storm outside had softened to a distant whisper, and the emergency lights hummed quietly above the dining room. The chaos that had consumed the mansion all night was gone. In its place was something heavier. Hope. Richard Whitmore stood motionless, staring at the pages in his hands. His eyes moved across the letter again and again as though he could not trust what he was seeing. Across the table, Evelyn covered her mouth. Tears slid silently down her face. Daniel lowered himself into a chair, defeated by a truth larger than money, larger than scandal, larger than himself. Around them, the investors and attorneys sat in complete silence. Their phones were no longer raised. No one cared about recording anymore. Some moments were too human for that. Maya stood quietly beside the table. The cold emergency light reflected softly against the silver tray near her arm. Hours ago, she had been the easiest person in the room to ignore. Now every person there seemed aware of her presence. Not because she demanded attention. Because she never had. Karen Ellis slowly stepped beside Richard. "The investigation found records connected to a private trust," she said softly. "The trail led to her." Richard closed his eyes. A long breath left his chest. For the first time all night, he looked relieved and devastated at the same time. Years of assumptions. Years of anger. Years of grief. All of it suddenly questioned by a single sentence. Evelyn stepped closer. "I was afraid." Richard looked at her. She did not look away. "Every year that passed made it harder to tell you." The room remained silent. There was no defense left. Only honesty. Richard nodded slowly. The anger that had consumed him earlier seemed to dissolve into exhaustion. Then his gaze shifted. Toward Maya? She saw it immediately. The realization. The weight of everything that had happened. Richard took several slow steps across the room. The sound of his shoes echoed lightly against the hardwood floor. When he stopped in front of Maya, nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Even the rain seemed to pause. Richard looked at her for a long moment. "You came here to work." His voice was quiet. "And somehow you ended up saving my family." Maya lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back at him. "I only followed the truth." Richard nodded. His expression tightened. Emotion threatened to break through, but he held it together. Barely. "And I spent the entire evening refusing to listen." Maya said nothing. The silence between them carried more weight than words could. Around the room, people watched the moment unfold. Investors. Lawyers. Executives. The same people who had laughed earlier now looked uncomfortable with the memory. Richard slowly extended his hand. Not as an employer. Not as a billionaire. As a man admitting he was wrong. The room seemed to stop breathing. Maya looked at his hand for a second. Then she took it. The gesture was simple. Quiet. But it changed everything. No applause followed. No dramatic speeches. Just a room full of people witnessing dignity defeat pride. Richard released her hand and stepped aside. For the first time all night, Maya was no longer standing at the edge of the room. She stood at its center without moving an inch. Hours later, the first light of morning slipped through the tall windows. The storm had passed. The emergency lights shut off one by one. Soft sunlight reflected across the silverware, the empty glasses, and the scattered documents that had changed so many lives. Guests quietly departed. Phones disappeared into pockets. Voices softened. The mansion no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place beginning again. Maya collected her tray near the doorway. The metal had gone cool in her hands. She glanced back once. Richard stood beside the window, holding the letter. Evelyn stood next to him. Neither spoke. They simply looked toward the sunrise. Maya turned and walked toward the front entrance. Her footsteps echoed gently through the long hallway. No one stopped her. No one called after her. As she reached the doors, the first golden rays of morning stretched across the floor and touched her path. Behind her, an empire was learning humility. Ahead of her, the world felt wide open. And for the first time that night, the mansion was completely silent. Not the silence of secrets. The silence of truth finally being heard.